The Christmas lights blurred through her tears as Emma stood shivering on the pristine marble steps of the Montgomery estate. Snow fell softly around her, each flake a cruel reminder of the holiday magic that had just been stripped away. Her single duffel bag sat beside her, hastily packed with whatever clothes she could grab before security escorted her out. The massive oak doors had slammed shut moments ago, leaving her stranded in the bitter December cold with nowhere to go and $23 in her pocket. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma's journey to this moment had begun 18 months earlier in the small farming town of Cedar Falls, where she'd grown up helping her grandmother run a failing flower shop. After her grandmother passed, Emma had used the last of her inheritance to move to Chicago, determined to build something better. She rented a cramped studio above a pizza shop and took a job at Rosewood Country Club, one of the city's most exclusive venues, serving champagne to people who spent more on a single dinner than she made in a month. The work was exhausting, but Emma found purpose in the small details that made events special. She had a gift for remembering preferences, anticipating needs, and creating moments that mattered. Members began requesting her specifically, and despite the class divide, she earned respect through genuine care and impeccable service. That's where she met David on a snowy February evening during the club's annual charity auction. While other wealthy patrons treated staff as invisible, David approached the bar with a warm smile and asked about her day. He ordered a simple bourbon, said please and thank you, and left a generous tip, not to show off, but because he seemed to genuinely appreciate her work. When the evening ended, he lingered as she cleaned up, offering to help carry heavy trays. Their conversation started small but grew deeper each time he visited. David spoke about his love for architecture, his frustration with superficial social circles, and his dream of designing buildings that brought communities together. Emma shared her passion for event planning, her hopes of starting her own business, and stories from her small-town childhood. Unlike other members who saw her uniform before her face, David saw her dreams and encouraged them. Their first real date happened 3 months later when David waited for her shift to end and suggested coffee. They walked through Lincoln Park as spring emerged, talking until sunrise about everything and nothing. Emma felt a connection she'd never experienced, a sense of being truly seen and valued. David was different from the entitled wealthy men she saw daily. He drove a modest sedan, chose casual restaurants, and seemed more interested in conversation than impressing anyone. David's background remained somewhat mysterious. He mentioned family in Connecticut and work in development consulting that required frequent travel. When pressed for details, he'd deflect with humor or change subjects. Emma noticed his clothes were well made, his watch expensive, and he never worried about money, but he lived simply in a nice but unremarkable downtown apartment. She assumed he came from comfortable circumstances but nothing extraordinary. Their relationship deepened quickly. David was attentive without being possessive, supportive of her ambitions, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. When he traveled for work, he'd send thoughtful texts in return with small gifts that showed he'd been thinking of her. Emma felt cherished in a way she'd never imagined possible. After 8 months together, David proposed during a quiet Sunday morning in her tiny apartment. No elaborate setup or expensive ring, just him kneeling beside her bed with tears in his eyes, asking if she'd build a life with him. Emma said yes without hesitation. They planned a simple ceremony for the following spring, with Emma's childhood friends and David's business partner, James, as witnesses. David explained his family was dealing with some drama and preferred to meet her after things settled down. The wedding was perfect in its simplicity. Emma wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit, and carried wild flowers from the farmer's market. David looked at her like she was the only person in the world. They honeymooned at a cozy bed and breakfast in Vermont, spending days hiking and evenings planning their future together. Married life felt natural and easy. They moved into a beautiful brownstone that David said belonged to a friend who was relocating. Emma started a small event planning business from home while David traveled increasingly for work. His trips grew longer and more frequent, taking him to places like Dubai, Singapore, and London. He'd apologize profusely for the absences, explaining that a major project required his attention but promising it would settle down soon. Emma noticed small inconsistencies that nagged at her. David received calls in languages she didn't recognize and would step outside to take them. Bank statements showed substantial deposits, but when she asked about their financial situation, David would say they were comfortable and change the subject. Sometimes expensive packages arrived addressed to David Montgomery instead of David Mitchell, the name on their marriage certificate. When she mentioned it, he laughed and said it was a mix-up from his business partner's office. The invitation to Christmas dinner with David's family arrived in November via an elegant cream-colored card with embossed lettering. David seemed nervous as he explained that his parents, Victoria and Charles Montgomery, wanted to finally meet her. Emma was excited but anxious, sensing this meeting carried weight she didn't fully understand. The Montgomery estate took her breath away. Rolling grounds covered in perfect snow, a circular driveway lined with luxury cars, and a mansion that belonged in a movie. Uniformed staff opened doors and took coats while Emma tried not to gawk at the crystal chandeliers and original artwork covering every wall. Victoria Montgomery swept into the foyer like royalty, her silver hair in a perfect chignon, and diamonds glittering at her throat. She assessed Emma with calculating eyes, taking in her department store dress and nervous smile. Charles followed, distinguished and cold, barely acknowledging Emma's existence beyond a brief handshake. David's sister Catherine smirked from the grand staircase, her designer gown and superior attitude making Emma feel underdressed and unwelcome. Christmas dinner was a 3-hour ordeal of subtle insults disguised as polite conversation. Victoria questioned Emma's education, family background and career aspirations with surgical precision. Each answer seemed to confirm some negative assumption. Catherine made pointed comments about women who marry up and the importance of breeding in social circles. Charles remained largely silent, but his disapproval radiated across the dining room.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
David tried to deflect and change subjects, but his family was relentless. Emma felt like a specimen under a microscope, every word and gesture scrutinized for evidence of her unworthiness. By dessert, her face hurt from forcing smiles while enduring their veiled cruelty. The morning after Christmas, David received an urgent call requiring him to fly to Tokyo immediately. A major deal was falling apart and only his personal intervention could save it. Emma suggested returning home, but Victoria insisted she stay to get better acquainted. David seemed relieved, kissing Emma goodbye and promising to call daily. The moment David's car disappeared down the driveway, the mask slipped completely. Emma was moved from the luxurious guest suite to a small room near the servants' quarters. Victoria suggested she help with household tasks since she was accustomed to service work. Catherine made cutting remarks about Emma's clothes, mannerisms, and small-town background. Charles ignored her entirely, treating her like furniture. Days passed without word from David. His phone went straight to voicemail, and Victoria claimed the time difference made communication difficult. Emma felt increasingly isolated and trapped. The staff, taking cues from the family, treated her with barely concealed contempt. She overheard whispered conversations about gold diggers and inappropriate marriages. The breaking point came during a tense lunch when Victoria discovered her grandmother's pearl earrings missing from her jewelry box. Without evidence or hesitation, she accused Emma of theft. When Emma protested her innocence, Victoria's facade of civility crumbled completely. She called Emma a common thief who had manipulated David into marriage, claiming she'd suspected Emma's true nature from the beginning. Within hours, Emma found herself standing in the snow with her belongings, cast out like yesterday's garbage. Victoria's parting words echoed in her mind as the estate gates clanged shut behind her. David would be told the truth about his wife's character, and their marriage would be annulled before he returned. Emma had never felt more alone or betrayed, wondering if everything she'd believed about love and family had been a lie. Emma found herself at a rundown motel 15 miles from the Montgomery estate, using her last $23 to secure a room for 2 nights. The place smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams, with thin walls and a heater that rattled like a dying engine. She sat on the sagging mattress, still wearing her Christmas dress now wrinkled and stained with tears, trying to process how her life had imploded so completely. The accusations replayed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Victoria's cold voice declaring her a thief, Catherine's satisfied smirk as security escorted her out, and Charles' dismissive wave as if she were merely an inconvenience to be removed. Worst of all was the gnawing fear that David would believe them. She'd been married to him for less than a year while they'd been his family for 28 years. Who would he trust? Sleep came in fitful waves punctuated by anxiety and the sounds of other guests arguing through paper-thin walls. Emma's phone remained silent, its battery slowly dying like her hope. She'd tried calling David countless times, but every attempt went straight to an automated message about international roaming. By the second day, hunger forced her to venture out to find the cheapest food possible, stretching her remaining dollars as far as they would go. The knock on her door came at 2 in the morning on December 28th. Emma jolted awake, heart pounding as she peered through the grimy peephole. Despite the distortion, she recognized the familiar silhouette immediately. David stood in the flickering light of the motel's broken neon sign, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled and desperate. She opened the door slowly, unsure what to expect or even what she wanted to hear. David's eyes were wild with exhaustion and something else, a fury she'd never seen before. His expensive coat was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Emma," he breathed, relief washing over his features before being replaced by anguish. "James tracked down your credit card transactions. I've been driving to every motel within 50 miles. Inside the cramped room, David paced like a caged animal while Emma perched on the edge of the bed, maintaining distance between them. The space felt impossibly small with the weight of unspoken truths and broken trust filling every corner. "They told me you stole from my mother," David began, his voice cracking slightly, "but I knew immediately it was impossible. Not you, never you. When I couldn't reach you, when they claimed you'd simply disappeared, I knew something terrible had happened." Emma studied her husband's face, searching for deception but finding only genuine torment. "Why couldn't I reach you?" she asked quietly. "I called hundreds of times." David sank into the room's single chair, looking older than she'd ever seen him. "My phone was destroyed in an accident at the construction site in Tokyo. I didn't have your number memorized because it was always programmed in. It took 2 days to get a replacement and discover the dozens of voicemails you'd left." The explanation felt plausible, but Emma's trust had been shattered too completely for easy repair. "There are things you haven't told me, David. Important things. Your family lives like royalty, and you let me believe you were just comfortable. What else are you hiding?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Everything," he said finally. "I've been hiding everything because I was terrified of losing you the way I lost everyone else." He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through news articles, financial reports, and business magazines. The headlines made Emma's head spin. "Tech mogul David Montgomery announces expansion into Asian markets." "Montgomery Industries reports record quarterly profits." "The hidden genius behind tomorrow's smart cities." The photos showed her husband at corporate events, ribbon cuttings, and board meetings, but this wasn't the David she knew. This version wore $1,000 suits, commanded rooms full of executives, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned the world. "I'm not worth millions, Emma," David said softly. "I'm worth billions. Montgomery Industries isn't just my family's company, it's mine. I built it from a small architectural firm into a global technology and construction empire. The projects I've been traveling for, the mysterious phone calls, the unexplained money, it's all because I run a company that spans 6 continents." Emma stared at the articles, trying to reconcile the images with the man who'd proposed to her in a tiny apartment wearing pajamas and bedhead. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. David continued, his voice gaining strength as the truth poured out. "My parents used to run the original firm, but they were content with small projects and local clients. When I started expanding internationally and incorporating new technologies, they felt left behind. They still live on the estate and use the Montgomery name, but everything belongs to me now. I let them maintain the illusion of control because they're my family, but the real power, the real money, it's all mine." "But why hide it?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why pretend to be someone you're not?" "Because everyone I'd ever dated wanted David Montgomery the billionaire, not David the person," David replied, pain evident in every word. "They wanted the private jets, the expensive dinners, the status of being with someone powerful. When I met you, you saw past all of that to who I really am underneath. You fell in love with the man who carried your trays and listened to your dreams, not the one who could buy you anything you wanted." Emma felt her anger beginning to shift toward understanding, but betrayal still stung. "So you tested me," she said. "You let me struggle with my little event planning business while you could have given me every opportunity I ever dreamed of." "I wanted to," David said earnestly. "Every day I wanted to solve all your problems and give you everything. But I needed to know that you loved me, not what I could provide. I was selfish and scared, and I'm so sorry." The room fell silent except for the rattling heater and distant traffic. Emma processed everything she'd learned, trying to integrate this new reality with the life she thought she'd been living. "Your family," Emma said finally, "they knew who you really were." "Of course," David replied, bitterness creeping into his voice. "They've resented my success for years. My mother especially hates that I've surpassed everything they built. They were always looking for ways to undermine my happiness, and you became their target because you represent everything they think they've lost. They threw me out like garbage," Emma said, fresh tears threatening. "They made me feel worthless, like I was some con artist trying to steal from them." David's expression hardened into something Emma had never seen before, cold and calculating in a way that reminded her of the corporate photos. "That ends now," he said simply. The next morning, David's driver picked them up in a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Emma's childhood home. As they approached the Montgomery estate, Emma felt her stomach churning with anxiety and anticipation. David squeezed her hand reassuringly, but his jaw was set with determination that spoke of consequences to come. They entered through the front door without knocking, David using a key that apparently still worked despite everything. The family was gathered in the breakfast room, probably discussing their successful removal of the unwanted daughter-in-law. Victoria looked up from her newspaper with practiced surprise that quickly turned to calculation when she saw Emma beside her son. "David, darling," Victoria began in her most maternal voice, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. This woman stole from us, and when we confronted her, she became quite volatile." "Stop!" David's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. His tone was quiet but carried an authority that made everyone freeze. "I know exactly what happened here. I know about the lies, the cruelty, and the fabricated theft charges." Charles attempted to interject, but David held up a hand for silence. "The security system I installed throughout this house has been recording everything for the past 6 months. Every conversation, every cruel comment, every moment of your treatment of my wife has been documented and saved to secure servers." The color drained from Victoria's face as the implications became clear. Catherine stopped mid-sip of her coffee, and Charles actually looked directly at Emma for the first time since they'd met. David continued, his corporate persona now fully in control. "You humiliated and abused the woman I love because you thought she wasn't worthy of your imaginary status. You threw her out with false accusations because you believed you had the power to destroy my marriage. You were wrong on every count." He placed a manila folder on the breakfast table with deliberate precision. "Inside you'll find documentation transferring ownership of this estate to a charitable foundation I've established. You have 60 days to relocate. The cars, the staff, the monthly allowances, all of it ends today." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this to your own family," she gasped. "We raised you, supported your dreams, gave you everything." David's laugh was harsh and without humor. "You gave me a foundation, that's true, but everything I built beyond that happened despite your limitations, not because of your help. And the moment you decided to destroy the person I love most, you stopped being my family." Charles found his voice sputtering about ingratitude and respect, but David was already moving toward the door with Emma's hand firmly in his. Sophia called after them, tears streaming down her face. "David, please, we made a mistake, but don't abandon us completely." David paused at the threshold, looking back at his sister with something that might have been regret. "I'm not abandoning you, Sophia. I'm protecting the family I chose from the family that chose cruelty over love." As they drove away from the estate for what Emma realized would probably be the last time, she felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Justice had been served, but at the cost of relationships that could never be repaired. "Where do we go from here?" Emma asked, watching the mansion disappear behind them. David smiled, and for the first time in days it reached his eyes. "Anywhere you want. We can stay in Chicago, move to New York, buy a house in Tuscany, or go back to Cedar Falls and help your community grow. I have resources now that we both know about, but more importantly, I have you." Emma considered the endless possibilities stretching before them. The woman who'd been thrown out in the snow just days ago was now married to one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. But more than that, she was married to a man who'd given up his entire family to protect her dignity and their love. 6 months later, they lived in a restored Victorian house in Emma's hometown of Cedar Falls. David had opened a regional office there, bringing jobs and opportunities to a community that desperately needed both. Emma's event planning business had expanded into a full-service company that specialized in making dreams come true for people with modest budgets. They'd established a foundation providing scholarships and business loans to young people from small towns who had big dreams but limited resources. David traveled occasionally for business, but never for more than a few days, and always with complete transparency about where he was going and why. Victoria had called once to apologize, though her tone suggested the apology was motivated more by financial necessity than genuine remorse. David had listened politely, and then explained that forgiveness would require acknowledgement of the full scope of her actions and their impact. They hadn't heard from her since. Catherine had surprised them both by visiting Cedar Falls and spending a weekend learning about their new life. She'd seemed genuinely impressed by the community work and had quietly asked if there might be a role for her in the foundation. David had been cautious but hopeful, believing that people could change if they truly wanted to. Charles had maintained his silence, apparently content to live on his reduced circumstances rather than admit he'd been wrong. For Emma, the most remarkable change wasn't the money or the opportunities, though those were certainly life-altering. It was the knowledge that she'd been loved completely by someone who could have chosen anyone in the world. David had hidden his wealth not to deceive her but to ensure that their connection was real and lasting. Sometimes she thought about that snowy Christmas morning when she'd stood at the estate gates with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The woman who'd been cast out as worthless had discovered she was worth more than gold to the right person. And the man who'd seemed too good to be true had turned out to be even better than she'd dared to imagine. Their story had become local legend in Cedar Falls, inspiring other young people to believe that love could indeed conquer all obstacles. Emma often told them that the most valuable things in life, trust, respect, and genuine affection, couldn't be bought at any price. But when you found them, they were worth protecting at any cost. That's what David had done for her, and what she would spend the rest of her life doing for him in return. True love, it turned out, really could move mountains, or at least remove the people standing in its way. 3 years had passed since that snowy December night when Emma's world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of 48 hours. She stood in the gleaming kitchen of their Cedar Falls home, watching David through the window as he played fetch with their golden retriever in the backyard. The morning sun caught the highlights in his hair, and she marveled at how different their life had become from those early days of secrets and uncertainty. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Those first months after leaving the Montgomery estate had been filled with difficult conversations, therapy sessions, and the slow work of rebuilding trust. Emma had insisted on counseling, not because she doubted David's love, but because she needed to process the trauma of being cast out by people who were supposed to become her family. David had attended every session, working through his own issues about wealth, identity, and the fear that had driven him to hide his true self for so long. Their therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, had helped them understand that their relationship's foundation was solid despite the deception. David's fear of being loved for his money rather than himself was understandable given his past experiences, while Emma's feelings of betrayal about the hidden wealth were equally valid. They'd learned to communicate more openly, with David sharing the pressures of running a global corporation, and Emma expressing her struggles with imposter syndrome in their new financial reality. The foundation they'd established had grown beyond their wildest expectations. What started as a simple scholarship fund had evolved into a comprehensive program supporting rural communities across the Midwest. They'd built affordable housing, created job training programs, and established business incubators that helped local entrepreneurs turn ideas into successful ventures. Emma found herself naturally gifted at identifying promising projects and connecting resources with needs. David had restructured Montgomery Industries to be more socially conscious, implementing profit-sharing programs for employees and environmental sustainability initiatives across all their projects. He discovered that using his wealth purposefully brought him more satisfaction than accumulating it ever had. The company's reputation had actually improved under his more ethical leadership, attracting top talent who wanted to work for an organization that valued people over pure profit. The house they'd chosen in Cedar Falls reflected their new priorities. While spacious and beautifully appointed, it wasn't ostentatious. Emma had insisted on a home that felt welcoming to everyone, from the local pastor to visiting corporate executives. The kitchen table where they ate breakfast had hosted countless strategy sessions with community leaders, homework help for local teenagers, and intimate dinners with the friends they'd made in their adopted hometown. Their relationship with David's family remained complicated. Victoria had eventually swallowed her pride enough to send a formal apology letter, though it read more like a legal document than a heartfelt admission of wrongdoing. She'd lost her social standing when news of David's decision spread through their elite circles, and Emma sometimes wondered if the apology was motivated more by isolation than genuine remorse. Charles had maintained his stubborn silence, apparently preferring pride to reconciliation, According to Catherine, he spent his days reading financial newspapers and making bitter comments about ungrateful children. Emma felt sorry for him despite everything he'd put her through. His inability to admit fault had cost him a relationship with his son that could never be recovered. Catherine had surprised everyone by embracing the opportunity for redemption. After that first tentative visit to Cedar Falls, she'd gradually become involved with the foundation's work. Her connections in high society, once used for shallow networking, proved valuable for fundraising and awareness campaigns. She developed a genuine friendship with Emma, built on shared experiences of growing up feeling inadequate, and the mutual respect that came from working toward common goals. The most profound change had been in Emma herself. The woman who'd once felt grateful for any acknowledgement from wealthy patrons at the country club now moved confidently through boardrooms and gala events. She discovered that her instincts for understanding people and creating meaningful connections were just as valuable in philanthropy as they'd been in event planning. David often said she had a gift for seeing potential where others saw only problems. Their marriage had deepened in ways Emma hadn't thought possible. David no longer traveled constantly, having built a management team he trusted to handle day-to-day operations. When business did require his personal attention, Emma sometimes accompanied him, turning work trips into opportunities to explore new places together. They'd learned to balance David's corporate responsibilities with their shared commitment to making a difference in their community. The media attention had been challenging at first. When news broke about David cutting off his family to protect his wife, it sparked debates about loyalty, class differences, and the responsibilities of wealth. Emma had been uncomfortable with the scrutiny, but she'd learned to use their platform to highlight the work they were doing rather than dwelling on past drama. Financial security had taken adjustment for Emma, who'd grown up counting every penny. David had been patient as she learned to think beyond immediate needs and short-term goals. They'd established personal budgets that included generous allowances for helping others, from paying off medical debt for struggling families to funding art programs at the local school. Emma found joy in being able to solve problems that money could fix while never forgetting that the most important things in life couldn't be purchased. Their closest friends were an eclectic mix of Cedar Falls locals and colleagues from David's business world. Dr. Martinez, who ran the rural health clinic they'd helped expand, often joined them for Sunday dinners along with Sarah and Tom, who owned the hardware store where David had learned to identify with community concerns rather than standing apart from them. These relationships, built on mutual respect rather than financial advantage, had taught them both the value of genuine connection. Emma had maintained her event planning business, though it had evolved considerably. Instead of focusing on weddings and corporate parties, she specialized in community celebrations and fundraising events. Her reputation for creating magical experiences on any budget had spread throughout the region, and she found deep satisfaction in helping people mark important moments regardless of their financial circumstances. The couple had also begun discussing starting a family, something that had seemed impossible during their early struggles with trust and identity. Now, with their relationship on solid ground and their purpose clearly defined, they'd begun preparing for the possibility of children who would grow up understanding both privilege and responsibility. David had surprised Emma on their third wedding anniversary by suggesting they renew their vows in a ceremony that reflected who they'd become, rather than who they'd been pretending to be. This time, they'd invited everyone who mattered to them, from local business owners to international colleagues, creating a celebration that honored both their humble beginnings and their extraordinary journey. The ceremony had taken place in the community center they'd helped fund, decorated with flowers grown by local farmers and food prepared by the restaurant where Emma had once worked during her early days in Cedar Falls. Victoria had not been invited, though Catherine had served as Emma's matron of honor, their friendship now genuine and tested by time. As Emma finished her morning coffee and prepared for another day of foundation work, she reflected on how dramatically her definition of wealth had changed. The money was useful certainly, and it had opened doors she'd never imagined walking through, but the real treasure was the knowledge that she was loved completely by someone who could have chosen anyone, and that together they were using their resources to create opportunities for others who reminded them of who they used to be. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Catherine, calling with news that Victoria had suffered a mild heart attack and was asking to see David. Emma listened carefully, then told Catherine they'd discuss it and call back. The old Emma might have been vindictive, taking satisfaction in the former matriarch's vulnerability, but the woman she'd become understood that holding grudges poisoned the holder more than the target. When she shared the news with David, she wasn't surprised by his immediate concern despite everything that had happened. That capacity for forgiveness, even when it wasn't deserved, was part of what had made her fall in love with him in the first place. They would visit his mother, not because she'd earned the right to their presence, but because they'd chosen to live according to principles that elevated them above past hurts. Later that evening, as they drove toward the hospital where Victoria was recovering, Emma felt grateful for the journey that had brought them to this point. The woman who'd been thrown out in the snow had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. The man who'd hidden behind false modesty had learned that authenticity was more valuable than protection. Together they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal and misunderstanding. Their story had become proof that love could indeed overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, but only when both people were willing to do the hard work of becoming worthy of what they'd found. Emma squeezed David's hand as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, ready to face whatever came next with the confidence that came from surviving the worst and choosing to become better because of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.